Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to Moss and Mushroom ASMR. Today I am going to combine a request for typing on a mechanical keyboard with a little bit more logic because we haven't done that in a while. So I'm going to be typing out some of my favorite logical fallacies, really just common logical fallacies. Some of them are favorites, some of them aren't. And I will be typing that out as I explain them to you. So I hope you enjoyed this video. So here are 12 common fallacies. The first is the appeal to authority. This is when your argument rests on authority from an authority figure who is not actually a relevant authority for the evidence in question. So, for example, saying we should believe that lying is always wrong because Dr. Evan Johnson, a distinguished professor of microbiology, told me that lying is always wrong. In this case, Dr. Evan Johnson is an authority of some sort, but he's not a relevant authority when it comes to the morality of lying. So this is a fallacious appeal to authority. The next is the straw man argument, also sometimes called the straw person, or just the straw argument. This is when you misconstrue an opponent's argument and attack that misconstrued and inaccurate portrayal of the argument rather than the argument as the speaker actually intended it to be. So the first speaker might say, "It's wrong to leave small babies unattended in the supermarket." And the second speaker might say, "Today's children are being ruined by helicopter parenting. Giving them the freedom to run and play at will is important for their growth." So the second speaker seems like they're attacking the argument of the first speaker, but the first speaker never argued against free-range parenting. They just argued that it's wrong to leave small babies unattended in the supermarket. So this is a straw man argument. The next argument is the famous ad hominem. And an ad hominem where you attack the speaker instead of attacking their argument. Now, I should point out that not all personal attacks are ad hominem attacks. Sometimes what might seem like a personal attack is actually relevant, and if it is relevant, then it might not be fallacious. An ad hominem argument is an irrelevant attack on the speaker. An ad hominem argument, irrelevant attack on the speaker. An ad hominem might be, Senator Jones is wrong that we should increase taxes on corporations. He's an old hippie who did too many drugs in the 70s. So that's an ad hominem argument because the drugs Senator Jones did in the 70s or his hippiness has nothing to do with the rightness or wrongness of this particular policy position. But a attack on the speaker that might not be an ad hominem argument, and this could be open for debate, is something like this. We shouldn't listen to Senator Jones when he says we should raise taxes on corporations. He failed out of the economics program when he was in college and has consistently misrepresented the projected revenue stream of the policy. He's incompetent to be making tax laws. So in this case, they're talking about his college record and calling him incompetent, and those seem like attacks, but they are arguably relevant to the subject in question. So it's not always clear-cut, but you could at least make a strong case that something that looks like an attack on the speaker isn't necessarily an ad hominem fallacy. So the next one is ad populum. This is also called an appeal to popularity. And this is pretty simple. You should go to Coachella because everyone is going. So saying that everyone is doing something or that something's popular or cool and that that's a reason why it is good is a pretty common fallacious appeal to popularity. Of course, you can see why one does not actually lead to the other. The next is pretty similar, and it's called an appeal to pity. And I think that the Latin name is ad misericordiam, but I don't actually remember. Ad misericordiam. If it's not that, it's something similar. And this is exactly what it sounds like. So, for example, you should give me a raise because I've had a terrible headache for 2 weeks, and a raise would make me feel much better. That's an appeal to pity, but it's not actually I guess we wouldn't talk about it in terms of validity because it's not a formal argument. It's not a cogent argument because saying that you have had a terrible headache for 2 weeks doesn't actually suggest the necessity or the probability of the conclusion, which is that you should give me a raise. So the next one is the appeal to ignorance. This is an argument that a thing is true based on a lack of evidence for it being false. For example, there's no conclusive evidence that Abraham Lincoln was not a lizard in a human suit. You can't disprove it, so it's probably true. That would be an appeal to ignorance. They're all over the place once you start looking for them, and not just in conspiracy theories. The next one is the only causal fallacy that I'm going to be talking about today, although there are a whole collection of causal fallacies that are fallacies having to do with cause and effect. But this is the most common, and it's called post hoc ergo propter hoc, which roughly means after, therefore, because. And in a post hoc fallacy, you say that something caused another thing because it came before that thing. So, for example, I forgot to type it out. After hoc, this is a causal fallacy, and it roughly means after, therefore, because. An example of this is I ate a chocolate bar and then found out I was allergic to bees. Clearly, chocolate causes bee allergies. Or you could even say, without generalizing, clearly chocolate caused my bee allergy. In either case, it would be a post hoc fallacy. The next one is the false dichotomy. And this is giving only two possible choices and presenting them as the only choices, when in fact there are more. So if you're familiar with the concept of a dichotomy, an either or, this is just a false dichotomy, that when something is presented as an either or and it isn't actually just limited to those two, that would be a false dichotomy. Also sometimes relatedly called a false dilemma, although they're not exactly the same fallacy. So an example of a false dichotomy might be something like this. Either you visit national parks or you must hate the environment. You can pretty clearly see where that's a fallacy. This next one, equivocation, is a personal favorite of mine. Equivocation is when a word has multiple meanings, multiple distinct meanings, and one meaning is used in the premise to provide support for a different meaning in the conclusion. I think my favorite example of this, and there are a lot of examples of equivocation used in humor because it's really good for it, but the one I always use is, he can't be right-handed. Nothing about that boy is right. And again, pretty obvious why that's a fallacy, although, used for humorous purposes, who cares? But if you were to do that sort of move when you were trying to make an argument, then that would be fallacious equivocation. So the last two kind of come as a pair. They're opposites of each other. The first one is division. And division is the fallacy where you say that something that is true for the whole must be true for each of its parts. For example, America is a rich country. So every American must be wealthy. In this case, they're taking the whole America and attributing a property of the whole to each of the parts of the whole, every American, fallaciously. And its opposite, and I guess sibling, is the fallacy of composition, where you claim that something is true, something that is true for each of a thing's parts must be true for the whole. For example, every page of this book is thin, so the book itself must be thin. this has been a short video on just a few common informal logical fallacies. And I know I've been typing really quickly. But that's because I have been trying to type out exactly what I've been saying as I've been saying it. I know that some people probably prefer slow typing. And if that's you, let me know in the comments so that I can do that in another video. I'm so used to just typing as I'm talking that slowing down will be hard for me if I do a slowed down typing video, but I'm willing to do it for you all. Let's give it a try. So I guess the last thing that I'll mention is that these have all been informal fallacies. Which refer to mistakes of reasoning, whether those are mistakes of setting up the problem, mistakes of relevance, etc., that happen during argumentation. But a formal fallacy is different. If you've watched some of my other videos, a formal fallacy is when you put something into propositional logical notation and then you do an invalid move. So if the first premise of your argument is if P, then Q, if P, then Q, and your second premise is not P, the valid conclusion to that would be nothing, because you can't learn anything from denying the antecedent, which would be the name of that formal fallacy if you made the conclusion not Q. So I know I don't have any actual writing utensils in front of me, which is ironic since I have a keyboard. But there's no way for me to visually show you that notation. But I'll repeat it again. If P, then Q, not P, therefore not Q. That's called denying the antecedent, and that's an example of a formal fallacy. And a formal fallacy doesn't require any actual content. The P's and the Q's are just purely the structure of the argument. Whereas you'll notice with all these informal fallacies, all of them have to do with the content of the argument. If you broke the argument down into its logical notation and propositional or predicate logic, you wouldn't necessarily even be able to see these issues because they're all issues with the content of the premises and not with, or the conclusion, and not with the structure of the argument itself. But that's just a super quick primer on how these informal fallacies I've talked about that have to do with the content of the argument would be different than a formal fallacy that has to do with the structure of the argument. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you want to see similar videos, whether that's similar in terms of hit me with more fallacies or in terms of bringing back the mechanical keyboard, let me know, and I'd be happy to do more keyboard and or logic videos. And like I said earlier, if you would prefer slow typing, then let me know that also, and I will try to do a slow typing video. So that's all, folks. Good night.